Relationships can be complicated. That's especially true of relationships between different social class groups. One of the complications is that people of different social classes are, in many ways, segregated from each other. There's extensive residential segregation by social class, especially in the United States, among other forms of segregation. In plain terms, the poor often live in different neighborhoods, work in different jobs, shop in different stores, and their kids attend different schools than people who are more resource secure. Our day-to-day interactions with people different from us in social class status are limited compared to the frequency and type of daily interactions we have with people who are similar in social class status. That doesn't mean that social class groups do not interact with one another or relate to one another within our broader system of social institutions. We do. It does mean, however, that those relationships are often indirect, obfuscated, and difficult to see. And they are sometimes unpleasant to look at because they reveal things about us as a society that are not real flattering, to say the least. Sociologist Matthew Desmond, in his book Poverty by America, provides a rigorously researched and searing account of how the U.S. population actually depends on the existence of the poor, taking advantage of their poverty to sustain the more privileged lives that more resource-secure people lead. We take a closer look at Desmond's work in another episode. When it comes to relationships between social class groups, we would be remiss if we did not discuss and develop a basic understanding of the work of Karl Marx, which we're going to do in this video. Now, we must acknowledge from the outset that one would be hard-pressed to find a public historical figure who has been more controversial than Marx. To be sure, he is a lightning rod. And one would be hard-pressed to find a historical figure whose ideas have been more routinely and spectacularly misinterpreted, both by people who love his ideas and people who hate his ideas. And make no mistake, most people have either loved or hated his ideas. The controversy about Marx has created and continues to create a lot of noise about his ideas, about what he said, thought, and wrote, and about what he didn't say, think, or write. Everyone has to decide for themselves what they think about Marx, his writings, and his influence. But I advise forming that opinion with at least some accurate working knowledge of the ideas themselves, absent as much of the noise as possible. So this video is one take on Marx, and specifically some key tenets of his theory of capitalism. Take it or leave it. At least you'll know where some of these ideas come from. In the classes I teach, I've been known to use a silly demonstration to begin the conversation about Marx's ideas. Nothing like a bit of humor to broach the topic of one of the most controversial figures in human history. I ask my students to imagine that I'm starting my own manufacturing business in which I build airplanes. In this case, paper airplanes. I tell them that I've invested my own capital into this business with the plan of making state-of-the-art aircraft that I will sell to commercial airlines like United and Delta, as well as major shipping companies like UPS. I'm going to hire them to work for me, and they will do the labor required to build these extraordinary planes that will transform the industry, improving travel and supply chains alike. I have no idea how these planes will do that, but they will, and it's wonderful. Anyway, I will employ people to work in my factories, and I will pay them the hourly wage of $10 per hour, and I will sell each plane that comes out of my factories for around $110 million per plane, which is a discount relative to my market competitors. To model what the factory might look like, I line up a group of students standing shoulder to shoulder. On one end, a student has a stack of papers. That student's job is to pass one sheet of paper to the person next to them. Their job is to fold the paper down the middle lengthwise and then pass the paper to the next person, who then folds one corner to the middle, then passes to the next person. This proceeds to the end of the line, one fold per worker, with a pristinely folded paper airplane as the end product. I have shown each person in the assembly line exactly how to perform their respective fold in the plane and exactly what each plane should look like at the end of the assembly line. On-the-job training, if you will. And again, I sell each plane for $110 million, while each employee earns $10 per hour, and they work roughly 14 hours per day, 6 days per week. I generously allow for 1 day off per week. The work bell rings and the assembly line begins their work. It usually starts okay with people trying earnestly to make the correct fold and pass it on, but everything breaks down quickly. The first plane is usually a very loose interpretation of the model plane I've given them, and subsequent planes quickly devolve into wadded messes of tortured paper, certainly nothing resembling a paper airplane and possessing no qualities that could be described as aerodynamic. I pretend to get frustrated and fire the first person on the assembly line I can, and then immediately replace them with another student in the class who has been watching this demonstration, ordering them to do the previous person's job without providing them any instructions on how to do so. The whole manufacturing effort devolves quickly. This is not surprising, of course, since I've given them an impossible task, standing in one place, folding paper with vague instructions at best with no meaningful goal at all, receiving and passing pieces of paper that other people have also folded in ways that don't make sense. All the while, I'm verbally badgering them to hurry up so I can sell more planes and threatening to fire them and replace them. Promptly, my entrepreneurial endeavor is doomed to failure. So we usually stop this little exercise after just a minute or two of making mangled paper airplanes. I let everyone sit back down and we debrief. First, in our little demonstration, I represent the capitalist class, or the bourgeoisie. According to Marx, ownership is what defines my status, as well as my total control over the means of production. In other words, I make the rules for how everything gets done. The employees at my paper airplane factory represent what Marx called the proletariat, the laboring class. I asked one of my workers on my assembly line if they found making the same fold in a piece of paper over and over again ad infinitum for hours per day, days per week, to be intellectually stimulating. No. I asked another if they found the work to be a great source of pride. No. I asked another if they found the wage to be suitable. No. When Marx was living in Europe in the mid-19th century during the Industrial Revolution, he observed that the work lives of an alarming number of people consisted primarily of this type of repetitive, low-skilled, boring experience, work that was often unhealthy and unsafe as well. And many, many people were doing it, including children. As unpleasant as the work was, it was also worth nothing more than a sustenance wage, if one could even call it that, almost literally, just enough to keep you alive and coming back to work, where you spent most of your time. As such, this little exercise offers an example of how to think about what Marx called labor alienation. Work meant little to workers other than the pittance they were paid for it. Not only that, it was often a miserable experience, and people were removed from the products of their work, physically by virtue of their place within the system of manufacturing, and financially by virtue of the limited use of the product you could afford. Think travel by rail, the engine you helped build. People only did the work because their labor was the only thing they had to sell to eke out a living in the growing capitalist economy emerging along with the Industrial Revolution and related urbanization. An understanding of labor alienation as a socially structured worker experience is central to understanding Marx's theory of capitalism and how it works. Equally important is exploitation. Back to our silly paper airplane example. I sold each plane for $110 million while paying workers a song. So in that sense, there is the obvious exploitation of taking advantage of people for profit. But there's more to Marx's use of the term exploitation. What did I do to any of my workers who did anything I didn't particularly like? I fired them. And then what did I do? I replaced them as promptly as I fired them, drawing upon a readily available pool of cheap labor. So I profit from your labor, but I also keep you competing against each other for the jobs that I keep scarce. Sure, my jobs suck, but starving sucks more, and watching your children starve sucks even more. So you work, and you work hard under the terms I offer, because if you don't, someone else might snatch up that job. The scarcity and the competition the bourgeoisie impose upon the proletariat act in ways that prevent what Marx called class consciousness among the proletariat, or the recognition of their class status, the conditions they share with each other, and the shared source of their problems, the bourgeoisie. They are not just suffering, they are suffering similarly due to their systematic exploitation by the bourgeoisie. With those basic concepts and ideas of class relations, labor alienation and exploitation among and between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, Marx developed a broader theory of capitalism as a socially structured system. As with any set of social structures, it enables and constrains people's behavior. If social structures act as the rules of the game in society, then in capitalism there is one overarching rule, according to Marx: profit. One must profit to exist in a capitalist economy, especially if one owns a business. Since the bourgeoisie are the ones who own, then the bourgeoisie must profit, and they must continually profit. They can't stop or take breaks. They must perpetually seek profits. If they don't, they cease to exist or survive in a free market economy. This basic condition of capitalism is central for Marx. The bourgeoisie must profit. It is an existential mandate. Marx theorizes that this central structured feature of capitalism actually drives the bourgeoisie to their own doom. Because they must seek profit, they must continually expand. To perpetually profit, they must constantly make and sell more of whatever they make and sell. To make more, they need more materials that go into what they make, so they must expand to places around the globe where they can procure those materials. And they need more people to work to procure those materials. As they sell more, they need more markets of consumers to sell their products to, so they need to expand to more and more markets. As they expand, they need more people to work to make more products to sell to more people in more places, constantly needing more materials to make more products, relying on more workers to make all of this keep happening. Notice a pattern? More in perpetuity. According to Marx, the bourgeoisie cannot stop pursuing more, given the rules of capitalism and their role in it. Well, as the bourgeoisie expand their systems of production across the globe, seeking ever more profits, what necessarily happens to the size of the proletariat relative to the size of the bourgeoisie? The proletariat, as a class, gets exponentially larger than the bourgeoisie. Marx argues that this process ultimately will create a situation in which the proletariat will develop class consciousness. There will just be too many proletariat for them not to, and they will eventually revolt. Capitalism's own rules compel the bourgeoisie to pursue a goal that sets in motion a process that leads inexorably to capitalism's demise. In a nutshell, that's Marx's theory of capitalism. There's much more to Marx's theorizing. He wrote voluminously, but this is a very concise description of his orientation to capitalism. As with any theory, it has its strengths and weaknesses. Like I said at the outset, there's a lot of nonsensical noise out there about Marx, both in attacking his ideas and in praising them. One quite legitimate criticism of Marx is that his theory is overly reductionist, meaning he oversimplifies the vast complexities of social life into nothing more than class conflict. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the statement he wrote, quote, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle," end quote. Well, we know there's much more to social life than class struggle. We can acknowledge that and study other aspects of social life while acknowledging that class conflict is both real and consequential. However, while the theory has its limitations and shortcomings in explaining human experience, it also has enduring elements that capture ongoing empirical realities pretty well. That smartphone or tablet you're looking at right now? Chances are pretty good that the actual people who did the work to produce it can't afford one of their own. And there are staggering amounts of exploitation among workers around the world, including in the United States. At its core, Marx's ideas offer one perspective on the very observable relationships through which wealthier groups of people benefit from the work and the relative poverty of other groups of people. You, like everyone else, have to come to your own conclusions about Marx's ideas and their relevance or lack thereof for understanding social inequality in contemporary society. Just make sure you are focusing on the ideas themselves.